Thank you very much, Neil. And as well, thank you to the CNIC. I think it's been mentioned a couple of times, the diverse community in the room. That's great to see. Speaking to some people last night at the reception, there's a lot of people that are new to this space, are connected to it in certain ways, but kind of new to kind of the end part of this and the patient treatment side. So it's nice to see lots of posters and lots of discussion that we'll touch on that because it's so important. Everything we do is going to end at the patient and ensuring that we're making such an impact there. So again, thank you for everything you do to advance the ecosystem in Canada. And I will move on. Those are my disclosures. Neil spoke about that. So I'm sure a lot of you in the room are familiar with these images. They are gallium images of, on the left-hand side of the screen would be a patient that has neuroendocrine tumors. You can see their tumors lit up by a gallium scan. And then, once you can determine enough avidity there, that patient's selected for treatment with lutetium dotatate. So lutetium dotatate, the dotatate targets a certain biomarker on that cancer cell, delivers the lutetium, delivers that lethal payload, and after 6 treatments, you can see a lot of the black spots are gone. On the right side is a prostate cancer patient. I think these are probably the best known uses for the last couple of decades, just because it's impacted so many prostate cancer patients. Again, very similar concept. You image with gallium, you treat by tying lutetium to a PSMA targeting molecule, and that delivers the lethal payload to cancer. I'm highlighting this. This is the theranostic concept. So for those in the room, a little bit of a refresher. But there's 2 important aspects of this because you're developing 2 drugs in both cases. That's going to be the case as we move forward with new developments in this space. So it's kind of twice as hard as developing other drugs in the space. And that really needs to be appreciated because of the logistics and everything that goes behind this. So as we think of developing these drugs, there's a lot that's done behind this to make all of this happen for every patient. And Novartis has done a phenomenal job in turning these into blockbuster drugs. We talk about revenues a lot, but really that means a lot of patients are benefiting from this. So this is a plot, simply revenues against years. You can see in the beginning, starting in 2003, revenues were very low. I think it was about $20 million a year. These are the Bexxar and Zevalin days. Bexxar and Zevalin were drugs for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. They were really good drugs, but there just wasn't a connection between the nuclear medicine department and the hematologists. So that caused the failure in commercial success. Patients that got these did well. It wasn't that they didn't work. And it was not until really Bayer came onto the space with Xofigo, which is radium chloride, a simple salt to treat bone metastases. And Bayer did a phenomenal job of really setting the stage. So they had reach out, they had a great connection with urologists. They really set the stage for what came from Novartis. And they need a lot of recognition for that because establishing treatment centers, teaching people that these drugs are actually very straightforward to handle was super important for the follow-on here. I think in 2016 it is, Lutathera came on the scene, and everything really took off with Pluvicto. And you can see that it's quite evident on the slide. There are forecasts from the CEO of Novartis from a couple years ago, which I think still hold today. The Novartis portfolio will probably be north of $5 billion. I estimate that, so these bottom 2 numbers are my numbers, about 27,000 patients. And these are global numbers. That's a lot of patients being treated in this space, way more than probably anybody ever thought a couple of decades ago, or even maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And then the other part for the isotope producers in the room is that's a lot of lutetium. I had to do that calculation a number of times just because it's a crazy number. Nobody ever thought. I think it is pentabecquerels. So that is phenomenal. Bruce Power is obviously making a huge dent in that. To give you a little bit of context, because we talk about these big numbers, but what do other drugs do in the space? Antibody drug conjugates are probably the best analog in non-radioactive drugs for the treatment of cancer. That's where you take an antibody, put a toxin or a payload, and that targets a biomarker on cancer cells. So very similar to what we just talked about on the previous slide. Those drugs have seen a tremendous amount of innovation in their space. They've gone from drugs that were clumsy and difficult to handle and manufacture, sounds a lot like our industry, all the way to very, very finely tuned delivery mechanisms with very, very potent payloads where they've reduced the toxicity tremendously and increased the outcomes for patients. That's the future we're looking for. You know, obviously we're off to a great start. And this is what really triggered. Novartis' success, showing you could do this at scale, triggered these 3 acquisitions, which happened in 6 months. All started in October of 2023. It is just quite phenomenal. Point, RayzeBio and Fusion collected probably the greatest concentration of talent ever in the space, probably the greatest focus on infrastructure in the space, and overnight it disappeared to pharma. That is great news for patients because in pharma's hands, they have the capital to do more in this space. It means that all the biotechs and the VCs that invest in biotechs will see that there's companies out there that want to fill their pipelines. All of this is phenomenal news. The other thing here is there's lots of Canadian content. This Canadian content still exists in Canada. So Fusion in Hamilton, Point, who still has under Lilly, a facility here that's operated in Toronto, both manufacturing footprints, both have staff that go from supply chain discovery, CMC, clinical development in Canada. I estimate about 200 employees probably, which is great if you want to start building a biotech in Canada because there's a lot of skilled employees available. And now the land grab is over. There are, as I mentioned before, companies that now need to fill the pipelines. They need to justify these investments. And there are drugs coming, so what's nice is out of the acquisitions of BMS and AstraZeneca, there are 2 actinium drugs that are coming through the pipe. That is great news. We'll finally see what actinium does in a phase 3 trial, and then hopefully commercially. And Novartis, of course, is bringing through an actinium product as well. You know your industry is getting mature when you can start talking about generics entering the business. This has been coined radio equivalents. So there's a Lantheus and a Curium product that are in the final stages of the patent litigation that could be the first generics possibly approved later this year. Point has a connection to the one with Lantheus. We played a big role, and people in this room played a big role in that. So probably the isotope people in the room are interested in knowing how much actinium that's going to be, probably looking north of 2030, but that's going to be a lot of actinium that's going to be needed here. So when you operate at the clinical scale, the amount of actinium is lower just because you don't have as much patients. When you start impacting patients in these indications, that scale jumps very dramatically, and we need to be preparing for this today. So if we kind of pull back, these acquisitions in the theranostic space were actually part of a larger move by pharma to start dealing with this, I think it's a $200 to $300 billion a year in revenue patent cliff that's coming for them in 2030. All of pharma has a big focus in oncology, and they're doing big deals here. So this is, I believe, since 2017, and you can see the top, antibody drug conjugates. Honestly, from an innovation standpoint, again, in an analog to what we do, they're the best one, and pharma is snatching up all of that innovation. I'll show you that in a moment. But it's nice to see our space on this slide. That was not a pipeline acquisition. That was mainly focused on a capabilities acquisition. So now pharma has to justify that by filling the pipelines. And I'm going to get to that and what role Canada can play in a moment. But just to continue to hammer forward this ADC point, those 3 ADC acquisitions shown on this slide, 2 of them are preclinical phase 1 assets. So they're picking these up very early where they see innovation. They want innovation. They're not looking for Me Too type assets. They're looking for innovation. They like things to be distinguished from what the other companies are doing. So let's take a look at the innovation in the theranostic space. I'm going to go back and forth between theranostics and radiopharmaceuticals and RLT. I'm really talking about the therapeutic side of all of this, not the imaging side. The imaging side is tremendously important, and the therapies do not happen without it, but to combine both of those into a talk would take probably about an hour. So looking at clinicaltrials.gov, if you're not familiar with this, it's a great resource. It is kind of self-reported by industry and academics, and it's very good, I think, actually at catching a lot of the activity going on. They put up trials from phase 1 all the way through to phase 4. It goes back into the 90s. It is a great resource of looking historically at what's happened, looking at what's happening today. It is updated by some companies on a weekly basis. I follow this very closely. It's actually hard to do because it's just a bunch of data you have to download and analyze. I did that for you, so we're going to walk through that and have a look. But I'm going to talk about clinical trial starts, because when you start a clinical trial, and a lot of people in this room know this, it's very expensive. So when you see a clinical start on clinicaltrials.gov, it means there's an investment that's been made. That investment might have been made through granting, through an institution, or through a company. But it's important because that's money into the space. Where that money's going and where that money's flowing is what the space is interested in. So let's take a look at the data. So this is quite amazing. Around 2016, things changed dramatically in our space. I think by looking through the literature, this is really PSMA that drove this. The big papers on PSMA therapy came out in 2013. Endocyte, which Novartis bought, and that became Pluvicto. That happened in 2017. So people knew there was something special on the therapy side. And again, this is just for context in the room who like the detail. This is filtered for targeted drugs, solid tumors, ex-China. So there is an imaging represented here. So it was clearly an excitement about PSMA. Lutathera or dotatate had been used at this time, but if you look at those numbers, they're largely flat as contributions here. Still growing, but I think this trigger was really triggered by PSMA. And to give you a bit of context is against ADCs, which I've heard some people say we're about 5 years behind in our wave. So if this is the beginning of the theranostic wave, we would expect hopefully our numbers to double in the next 5 years. I don't know if we'll get there. We'll talk about that in a minute. But that just signifies the flow of capital into the ADC space. I think something that we really need to consider from a Canadian situation is what's going on in Canada. It's great. So I didn't update the figure just because that would have taken too much work, but I gave you a little bit of update there from the Canadian content. So we've seen an increase in the number of trials here. Interestingly, when you look at the percentage of trials run by industry, it's about 83% in Canada. That number actually surprised me. I think that's phenomenal. That means that biotech and pharma are coming here to do their work. We'll talk about that in a bit because I think we should not only do that, but we should actually have way more investigator-led studies in Canada. And then now, look at isotope supply. So this is another really interesting observation in the data is around 2021, we hit another inflection point. And when you look into the data, that inflection point is directly related to when actinium became available, widely available. DOE was supplying it in small amounts, but DOE started supplying more. There was a lot more flowing out of Russia through processors in Europe, and TerraPower came online, and some other GMP producers came online. And that really accelerated. Lutetium's going up in there too, but that actinium is what is really accelerating that growth. And that tells you that when a new isotope enters the space that people are excited about, they're going to start trials with it. Capital's going to flow and create innovation in the space. The part I don't like about this is all the other isotopes. It's flat. You can't get access to terbium. People talk about it a lot. We've got to unlock that. Lead is being held by companies. It's not widely available for development. That's just going to hold back lead in general. And we'll get into that a bit. But interesting observation, exciting to see what's happening with actinium here. I think it's going to be exciting to see what technologies outside of PSMA targeting and SSTR2 targeting will benefit from actinium. And then finally, I'd say the most interesting observation, and I really didn't go into this analysis with any thesis. This just kind of came out as I crunched through the data, is PSMA still dominates. So I'm talking about two different things on this slide. One is clinical trial starts, and one is active trials. So clinical trial starts in the plot and active trials in the boxes. PSMA and SSTR2 are at least 2/3 of the activity that starts every year. So 2/3 of the investment in the clinical trial starts is going into these. It's probably because PSMA is a unicorn. We've never seen the outcomes with RLTs like we have with PSMA. Probably justifies why the capital is going there. A lot of academic work, a lot of people trying to figure out how to make this better. I do think we have to divert that elsewhere. But if we look at active trials, 50% of active trials are here. And if you look at the ligands that they're using in these trials, they're all legacy ligands. It's not new and innovative ways of tackling PSMA and SSTR2, it's old ligands. So it just highlights that we're trapped here. And I think it was Wayne Gretzky who said, don't go where the puck is, go where the puck's going to be. So if you look at the gray area here, which is exciting, this is where the puck's going to be. We are seeing, since 2021, an uptick in trials in other targets. So let's dig into that. So shown here, sorry, just a second. Shown here is a breakdown of targets, indications, and then a fancy AI-generated image on binders and what they're binding. So I would say the pipeline is broad, but it is shallow. So we're looking in a lot of different places to target, to deliver radioisotopes to therapeutic and imaging. But as you go down that list, it becomes one trial. So it's great, a lot of work in FAP. I think if there's a lot of success in FAP, that's going to be very exciting because it will definitely branch off into in different areas of medical oncology, which will really expand the space. But as you get down there, we just have very, very broad, but we need to make this a lot deeper. We need a lot more people actually working on these targets. So that's an area for investment. Again, this is an opportunity for Canada. And then the second one, which is I think super exciting, is there are more people around the table. So we already have nuclear medicine and radiation oncology. We're now getting, rather than just urology, we're getting breast cancer doctors, we're getting pancreatic cancer doctors. That's exciting because capturing that mind share, getting that collaboration is challenging. They have their fields or their modalities that they like, that they're working on, that are not radioactive. Working with radioactive things, as you all know, is very challenging. So if you go to somebody to spark their curiosity, it probably goes away very quickly when they hear it's radioactive. So to get that interest, to spark that curiosity is very important. So even though I'm painting this a little bit negatively, I don't want to necessarily do that. I just want to say we need to do more. But I'm very encouraged that we're talking to a more diverse set of doctors that treat cancer. And then when we look at targets, it's really broken down into antibodies, small molecules, and what are now emerging as kind of these engineered solutions. They all go after something on the biomarker. So PSMA is a small molecule. It binds to a site on the PSMA target that's an enzyme inhibition site. So a small molecule sticks in there. You design it well enough, it sticks there really, really hard. Antibodies, they go after certain patches or epitopes on the biomarker. Antibodies actually stick even harder than small molecules because you get a larger patch. It's like Velcro. And then the orange one are actually a more emerging technology, although in our space, I'd say they're emerging. In other fields and treating cancer in other ways, this is kind of the bread and butter of the industry. Our space has really been stuck in small molecules and antibodies. We haven't really evolved in our thinking here. But we are seeing some drugs come out. There's going to be some data that will be coming out in a couple of weeks that's very exciting in the area of engineered proteins. And the nice thing here is you can use a lot of techniques to engineer out where you don't want it to go and engineer more in where you want it to go. And that helps you deal with the toxicities of antibodies and small molecules. So they are probably a solution. They're going to be another tool in the toolbox. But all this is to say is we have a very diverse way of looking at treating cancer with these drugs, and we're going after a lot of targets. So where can Canada play a role here? So I've touched on a few opportunities as we've gone through. I really wanted to highlight the amount of lutetium and actinium that we're going to need, because I think this is an area that we need to focus on as we move into new isotopes, is we want to move up as far as we can on this value chain. So that's from irradiation and reactors and cyclotrons all the way to sale of the finished product. And I think we should work very hard as we continue to move into this space to continue to keep as much of that value in Canada so that we can create, more economic benefit for Canada. So as we go out and do more of this, I just ask the room that we continue to assess the capital we need to do more of it in Canada, because you will reap the rewards 1,000-fold as you move further to the end of that supply chain. In new isotopes, we can see that if we unlock these, then that is going to definitely unlock clinical development, which is going to unlock benefit for patients. We have a number of institutions across Canada, the McMaster reactor, Triumph, just to name two. There are many more that I'm forgetting. We can do this in Canada. Again, Canadian solutions for Canadian innovation. The final two is really about sparking curiosity. And Rebecca is going to have a talk on the first one on the bottom there about investigator-led trials. So I won't go into this one very much, other than to say we need more grant money flowing in to lead more investigator-led trials. I think it's phenomenal that 83% of the work done in the clinics in Canada is industry-led. It means industry wants to come here and work with us. We just need to tack on to that more trials led by Canadian physicians in collaboration with the other oncology disciplines, so that, again, we can create that curiosity in the breast cancer doctors and lung cancer doctors to come over and have a look, because there's going to be trade-offs there. There are going to be modalities they're not going to be spending their time on in clinical development that we need them to come over. So we really got to work hard to spark that curiosity. And it just makes us the leaders in the space in using these drugs. We still really don't know the treatment paradigm here. We don't know if the first dose should be higher than the last dose, if they should be 6 weeks apart, 8 weeks apart, 4 weeks apart, if they should be a couple of days apart. It'd be great if all of that innovation was being done in Canada. The final one I want to touch on a little bit deeper, and I think this is an area that the industry needs. If we do this, I want this done in Canada. This just has to be done for the industry to really innovate, like the analog I've made with ADCs. So what's special about what we do is the isotope. What targets the cancer and the targets we go after is not special about our industry. That is done in many other indications outside of prostate cancer. People target things to biomarkers to treat disease. So there are experts that we need to go out to, and we need to make curious about our space. We need to invest and spend time. I'm going to ask everyone in the room over the next 2 days to think about how we can do that. And again, I'm not implying we're doing a bad job of it. I'm just implying we need to do more of it, and we need to work together and collaborate on how we get people interested here. Because if we can unlock the genius that sits in our academic institutions, if we can tie it into the AI infrastructure and quantum computing that Canada is building, we can unlock a tremendous amount of IP and benefit for Canada and Canadians and Canadian patients. We know Lilly and AstraZeneca and Bayer and Novartis are out there and are interested in coming into this space, and they need to fill their pipelines, so this IP will be in demand. And I have two examples where I did nothing and people came to me with these great ideas. One using AI to find new targets, and they wanted to use radioactive binders to treat cancer. And then another one where they're looking at using their knowledge in developing small biologics using AI, and they thought that their tools actually tied very nicely to RLT. And if those two, if we can amplify that, and again, their curiosity was developed on their own. Imagine if we focus on developing that curiosity, the number of people that would come forward. And the money exists. There's grant money. We're not changing anything here. We're just changing the questions that they want to ask the granting agencies for money for. So we know the granting agencies fund oncology. We know that Canada invests very, very heavily in medical isotopes for decades. Thank you for this. We need more of this. But we also need to move up that value chain. We need to invest in, creating that curiosity, and then, create those granting systems, those chairs, to get people outside of our industry interested in developing drugs here. So it's really doing more of what we see in these investments here, but then also moving up that value chain. So hopefully I'm on time here. I'm going to leave you with one final thought. So if we can invest in these two spots, so I'm not circling other areas, not saying that we don't need to invest in there. Medical isotopes is essential to this. We're all in this room because of medical isotopes. I think we need to do more there and continue to focus up the value chain there. I will continue to emphasize that. But what we're really not focused in is this IP creation around really novel, exciting binders going after exciting targets. We have that capability in Canada. We have to create that curiosity and then fund it. And then the clinical applications. I think there we can really make a huge difference here. We've been running therapeutic clinical trials in Canada for decades. We know how to do this. We just need that support for people to do more. So I think if we do it right and kind of tag on to the title of my talk, I think this can go super critical. So thank you very much.